Okay, this is chapter 14, part 2. Let's get into some of the author's contentions, some of which I will end up sort of supporting and agreeing with, other ones I push back a little bit on. So the author claims early in the chapter that mass shootings are common only in the United States. Evidence suggests that this is not correct if you're including gun attacks that are terroristic. There are countries around the world that have a lot of attacks more likely to be terroristic, terror motivated, politically motivated, than in the United States. And so when people say that this is common in the United States, they're really referring to these mass shootings where that are not terroristic, that are not politically motivated, that are motivated for other reasons that we've outlined in this course, a desire again, retaliation against schools, against the workplace, against other groups of people that you have issues with. But again, it's more of a personal beef than a political, ideological one. So that's not quite accurate. I mean, this author throughout the textbook focuses, and I would argue exaggerates the extent of terroristic attacks in the United States, and yet she's not considering those when she's looking at the global situation, where they are more common in some other countries around the world than the United States. So that's misleading based on the evidence as I have seen it. And also, it's not proper to be using the word common for mass shootings, even in the context of the United States. Because, as I have written here, that 1% or fewer of the people who are killed per year in the United States are killed in mass killings. You have over 20,000 people murdered in the United States, and almost all of those people, not almost all, but 99%, are killed not in a mass shooting. The typical, by far, the most typical killing in the United States is one perpetrator killing one victim. That's the norm. That's what's typical. Mass shootings or mass killings are the exception. And so being less than 1%, and homicide itself of any type is not a common event. The rate for that in the United States is, roughly speaking, 5 murders per 100,000 people in the United States per year. So your risk of being murdered in a given year is slim. It's higher than it should be, and the murder of anybody, any single person, is unacceptable and a tragedy. But we cannot call these violent incidents homicides, and definitely not mass homicides, as being common experiences. The author claims that it's uniquely only in that United States is unique only in gun ownership. It's a little bit awkward the way I've worded it there. They're saying the author claims that the only thing that's different about the United States than the rest of the world is gun ownership, and that's certainly not true. The United States is a very unique, distinctive country with unique, distinctive history and lots of differences between us and other countries. It is true that the United States has a high level of gun ownership, very high level of gun ownership compared to other countries in the world. But that's not the only thing that makes it unique and distinctive. Just as one example of that, there are scholars who think that the reason why the United States has a homicide rate higher than, say, similar comparable countries like other wealthy, developed, industrialized countries, say a lot of Western European countries. These scholars claim that the United States has a unique history of subculture that accepts, approves, encourages violence more than these other countries. So that it's a cultural thing, not necessarily a gun thing. That's just one example of how scholars will point to other factors other than guns as being unique to the United States. So here I've just restated what I said, that this idea that the United States has a subculture of violence somewhat unique to its history, that violence is concentrated in the South. I think I put that in a note a little bit further down, and that helps explain why the South is the region of the country that has the highest rates of homicide, is because of cultural subcultural violence, subculture of violence, which characterizes the southern region of the United States. That's a respectable hypothesis within criminology, which is different from a gun hypothesis. The author is correct that most mass killers choose guns, at least in the United States context, and it's true with a lot of attacks around the world too. And guns are easily accessible compared to other countries, no doubt about it. The United States has a significantly higher gun ownership than the vast majority of countries around the world. And even if you compare the United States with some other country that has a lot of comparably high level of guns, it's still, those other countries have a low level of gun ownership compared to the United States. About 1/3 of U.S. households have guns. Say roughly 1 out of 3. Um, and so if a household has guns, the average is about 5. And so that is number one according to the data. That's the number one highest gun owning uh, country in the world, the United States. So that seems pretty clear. Now, the average number of guns has grown over the years. So now it's 5, or could be even more than that. Now it keeps going up, 5, 6 guns in the average house that has any guns at all. That's significantly more than, you go back a few decades, it would be 4 guns or 3 guns. So you have people who are pro gun, who like guns, have tended to collect them and own more different types than in the past. And some of that has to do with socioeconomic conditions too, because guns are, a fair amount of money, and it's something that poor people would have difficulty affording, especially multiple guns. So as certain people have more disposable income, they've tended to buy more guns, and so those averages have gone up over the years. But you need to separate the fact that these households that have guns have more guns now than they have in the past. You need to separate from the fact that overall gun ownership, that the percentage of households in the United States that have any guns at all, 1 gun or more, that's dropped over the decades. 3, 4 decades ago, it was about a half of homes, close to 50% of homes around the United States used to have at least 1 gun. Now that's dropped down to 1 out of 3, and so that's a big drop over the decades. In spite of the fact, and that's contrary to the trends in mass shootings. Mass shootings have increased over the years as gun ownership per household gun ownership has dropped over the same period of time, although it has been stagnated. The gun ownership has stagnated in recent years, and come up slightly in the past few years. Not a lot, but slightly. Compared to the rest of the world, the U.S. is roughly average for total homicide rate. See, so if if the high level of gun availability in the United States was really the key driving force behind homicides, we should lead the world in homicides, total homicides. Our total homicide rate should be the highest if guns are driving the show, because we have the highest level of gun ownership. But when it comes to the total level of homicides, we're in the middle, globally speaking. We're high compared to Western Europe or Canada, but we're below many countries around the world, and more like average, very roughly speaking, average around the world. So despite being number one in having guns. So guns are often used in various types of serious violent incidents, and the author claims that this shows that gun availability drives violence in the United States. But to support this, you need to show that more guns leads to more total violence. So The author is quoting a lot of stats that show a lot of gun violence in the United States, and a lot of violent incidents involve guns, and more violent incidents involve guns than many other countries. And many other countries that have a real homicide, a real violence problem, they're more likely to be using other weapons like knives or machetes or blunt instruments to kill each other. The United States, when there's violence, there's more likely to be involved. But that's not. But this is something that's constantly repeated by people who do sort of gun violence research. But the issue is total violence is the issue. The issue is does getting back to those gun hypotheses, does the having a lot of guns around lead to more total violence, not more gun violence, more total violence? That's the issue. So if killers simply switch to a gun because they are easily accessible, this might not raise the rate of total homicide. It just might be that the killer chooses to kill you with a gun as opposed to killing you with something else. But only if it shifts it away from non-gun homicides to gun homicides, but the total rate remains unchanged. So maybe that's a little bit clear. Let me restate that. There's a hypothesis, a claim in criminology that's called switching. And it's the idea that having a lot of guns around doesn't get more people killed. It just causes criminals, elite criminals, to switch from other weapons like a knife to a gun, because the gun is easy and it does the job and may be preferred by a criminal. And so, but if it switches, that doesn't necessarily make the homicide rate go up. You can be just a switching that you get killed by a gun instead of a knife, but it doesn't lead to more homicides. There's the possibility of switching and not leading to more total homicides. So the issue should always be not more gun homicides or how many gun homicides. The question is the number of total homicides. Does the easy access to guns lead to more total homicides? That's the issue, and it's very often missed. It's a point that's very often missed by people who are discussing this violence problem and the issue of guns. Globally, more guns do not translate into more total homicides. So here's evidence that does not really support these various hypotheses that more guns leads to more violence. Because just to kind of summarize the data briefly, the regions of the world that have the most homicide are Latin America, number one. And that's not all countries in Latin America, but some countries in Latin America have very high homicide rates. And there's some countries within the sub-Saharan African region that have very high homicide rates. And that those regions of the world have very low levels of gun ownership. There's a lot of homicide going on in those countries, but it's not due to there being a high level of general gun ownership like we have in the United States. There's something else going on there. They're using things other than guns, or maybe only the criminals have guns, and law-abiding citizens who would not misuse guns, they don't have guns, and it's more in the hands of criminals who are killing people. It's not the case that the country in the world that has the most guns floating around, the United States, it's not the case that that's a country that's at the top of the list of homicide countries. It's in the middle, as I said before. These countries that are at the top, they do not have a lot of general gun ownership. The author is incorrect in claiming that the large spike in mass shootings in recent years, in the United States we're talking about here, is matched by guns becoming more widely available. So let's see here. The percent of household with guns in the United States, which is about 1/3 of households, I said it before, it's risen only very slightly, just a little bit over the past few years. It was stagnant for a long time, but it's been over the decades, it's been dropping from about 50% down to about 1/3. So So basically, the gun ownership has been fairly flat with maybe a little uptick, a little bit increase in the past few years. While if we focus on school shootings, for example, those have really jumped in the past few years. And so the there has not been a spike in general gun availability, which would be driving the big spike in school shootings. Another way of putting this would be if the number of school shootings followed the amount of guns that were out there, the availability of guns, the school shootings would have been fairly flat over the past several years because there has not been a huge spike in gun availability as measured by the percent of households with a gun. Let's stop there. We'll continue on in the next segment.